Welcome, folks. In front of you is the man we have all come to know as Riptide, lurker of the deep. But, like every character these days, he has an origin story. So let's see what sort of things he got up to in his early career. Before we begin this epic tale, I would like to give a quick shout out to Mox and Hull for once again running a fantastic event, and for going with Blitz over Sealed. We had a great turnout of 33 people and ridiculously good prize support, so really fun day all round. After going through the list, I will give a quick tournament report too, go through what my matchups were, kind of what happened in each game, and the deck link is in the description for those of you that just can't wait to give this baby a test drive. Right, so onto the deck. The style of the deck is generally pretty mid-range. We like blocking, but we are not aiming to fatigue, despite what everyone on the day was telling me I was trying to do. I was not trying to fatigue. We just more try and get as much value out of every hand as it just comes up. Obviously, if we're against a deck that's trying to fatigue us, we do have to try and pitch some threats for later, but we've got things in the deck to deal with that. With this build, you're more likely to go above rate with your smaller hands than with your larger ones, so an average turn would look like maybe blocking 6, playing a buff, loading in a 0-cost arrow with Riptide's hero ability, and then attacking with, a 7 attack with on hits. So for example, if we've got Searing Shot and Lace of Bloodrot, that is threatening total damage of 10, which is insane for Blitz. Riptide's hero ability in Blitz is generally more amplified because the young heroes start at half health, but the traps still deal 1 damage every time they trigger, despite there only being a third less of them in the deck, besides the legendaries, which is a good thing. So over the course of the game, it is possible to remove roughly half your opponent's health with trap damage while preserving your own, and then give them various detrimental on hits with the traps. Looking across the top here, we have all the equipment. I wanted the equipment lineup to be as straightforward and effective as possible. No New Horizons, Tunic, Death Dealer shenanigans. I just need my equipment to do exactly what I need it to do when I need it. So with that in mind, we have the Crown of Providence. This was chosen because it will always block 2, and it will dodge half of your opponent's Command and Conquerors basically for free because it's Blitz. This is super helpful for if we draw a lot of traps on a CNC turn, and it also fixes awkward hands. You all know what Crown of Providence does. For our legs, we went with the Perch Grapplers. This is just here for the block 2, and it put in a lot of work on the day, so I'm glad I played them. Many players will layer up in Blitz because they start with less life, and I am one such player. Snapdragon Scalers were a consideration, but they require you having a fair bit of space to make full use, and are basically useless when on the back foot. Bullseye Bracers is my arm piece. This is just ridiculously good. I think every Ranger is currently playing this. The AB came up in my top 8 match against the Emperor and also helped me beat a Vynnset in Swiss. And the reload +1 just says Bolt and Shot gets go again, and that's all we need it to do. The chest piece is Trench of Sunken Treasure. This is a must play for Riptide, especially in Blitz. The Arcane Barrier is obviously nice. Blocking one at the end of the game often comes up too. And getting a resource by bottoming a card allows for so many clean plays with cards like Codex, or for loading in a better arrow basically for free. For the bow, I opted to go with Dreadbore. This was probably the best equipment on the day. About half my opponents told me how annoying the card was after our game. It basically fixes any fatigue matchup on its own, as you're always attacking with less cards than your opponent is defending with, while making it really awkward for them to use their D-Reacts. The D-React effect, I think, came up in every single game, and it forces your opponent to give you their good attacking cards to stop you. The +1 means that with the Yellow Pitch and a 1-cost arrow, it's always on rate, and it guarantees Bolt and Shot gets go again for turns that you want to go wider on. It also makes your CNCs more punishing, as your opponent will be forced to put their D-Reacts in Arsenal. If they pitch them away, they risk drawing them late game when they cannot use them in hand again because I'm firing arrows, so they don't want to do that. I prefer Dreadbore to Death Dealer because you know exactly what you can do with Dreadbore when you see your hand and plan accordingly. I just value the consistency and would highly recommend you try this card out if you haven't already. Last piece of equipment is the Quiver of Abyssal Depths. This did put in a lot of work on the day. I'm glad I played this. It helps you keep threats in the deck. I actually inadvertently fatigued about a third of my opponents through a mix of representing good threats and blocking out, and the Quiver definitely helped me do this. Again, I wasn't trying to fatigue, it's not fatigueless, it just happened by attacking and putting your opponent on the back foot. So we'll move on to the main deck now. I'll just quickly scroll through so you can all see kind of what is what. I will start off by talking about the traps because they're the funnest part of Riptide. All of the traps perform really well on the day, so I probably wouldn't swap any of them out. Frailty and Inertia Trap are our 2 red traps. Frailty more than carried its weight and often got me 7 value through blocking 3, pinging for 1, and reducing the attack of 2 one-handed weapons and a card in Arsenal. The Inertia Trap really helped limit the scale of my opponent's turns. The Surprise Inertia can often ruin what your opponent had planned out for you as well, which is very nice. For the yellow traps, we're running Boulder Trap and Tar Pit Trap. These are on rate even without their own effects and without Riptide's ability. Read the effect of Tar Pit Trap and tell me that card isn't busted. It saved me from a few nasty on-hits on the day, and if you play it, it'll save you too. Boulder Trap is not a trap I normally run in CC, but for Blitz, I got really good value out of it because, as I mentioned earlier, there tends to be a lot more armor in this format, so getting rid of that armor early means your opponent has to make much more difficult decisions when you're coming at them for 7 with on-hits. They can no longer cover the breakpoint with their armor, and they have to give you more cards from hand. For the blue traps, we played all 3 of the legendaries. We've got the Buzzsaw, the Collapsing, and the Spike Pit down here as well. No matter what matchup you're playing these into, they are always above rate because they're a blue trap that blocks for 3. Each of them did something disgusting on the day. Collapsing Trap triggered against a dash player with a 5-card hand. Needless to say, he was not happy about that. Buzzsaw Trap stopped a claw that was coming in for 7 on a Blood Rush turn after my hand had been intimidated away. So instead of taking 7 damage, my opponent took 1 damage and I took 0. And Spike Pit helped me see out an Uzuri game because they cannot do anything unless they use reactions, basically. Next on to the arrows, I will first talk about Battering Bolt. It is a very strong card when combined with Dreadbore because your opponent can't just empty their hands of D-Reacts whenever they see it now. They actually have to give you cards from hand that they were going to maybe attack with instead if they want to keep those D-Reacts. Getting the hand knowledge as well lets you plan out your blocks a lot better, see kind of what you can do with your hand when you draw it back up and what's the best play. When paired with a blue, it becomes your ideal ratio of 2 card 7. It's also a popper, but you already knew that. I'm playing Bolt and Shot red and yellow because they both present breakpoints. You often con your opponent when they block this card because following it up with a buff and an arrow basically guarantees damage and is usually the same play you would have made even if they hadn't blocked out the Bolt and Shot. And this did come up a few times on the day. They'd kind of give me 2 cards from hand to block out my red Bolt and Shot coming in for 5, and then buff, 0 cost, and come in for 7, and it would go through, there's nothing they could do. But now that the secret's out, perhaps they will not do that anymore. However, it was fun while it lasted. We're next playing the Infecting Shot red and yellow because they also both represent a breakpoint with a great on-hit effect. The yellow put in a ton of work during the Skirmish because it's a really good pitch card. Riptide loves his yellows. And also coming in for 5 when loaded with Dreadbore. That is exactly what the red Infecting Shot does in non-Dreadbore lists. And if that arrow is good enough to play, the yellow one will be good enough to play by that logic as well. For our 0 cost red arrows, I'm playing the 2 copies of Endless Arrow and the 2 Searing Shot. I play these 2 because I believe they present the best on-hits out of all the 0 costs. Endless Arrow can truly be endless, especially as we have several ways of bringing it back, and Searing Shot is the best target for Codex if we have no resources floating. I did consider Drill Shot, but I found that I didn't consistently get value from its effect because armor is often used early to cover up the breakpoints, and also the Boulder Trap does the same thing but slightly better. Our other 0 cost arrow is Intoxicating Shot, a card that I've definitely warmed up to. It's a blue, so in the early game, it's a great pitch card. And because heroes have less life in Blitz, it is more risky for opponents to try and make use of the on-hit. Because if they take 4 or more, then that's a good chunk of their life gone. There was one game that my opponent initially was happy to take the damage for the on-hit. They even actually smiled as they did it and laughed. But I had a Tar Pit Trap and a Frailty Trap in hand ready for them. So when they attack next turn, the traps just completely messed up their whole game plan. Even in the early game, if you pair Intoxicating Shot with a buff, your opponent will almost always be forced to block it out because if you threaten a Blood Rot and 7 damage, it's not really worth getting the 2 tokens for that. The traps that I chose also complement this arrow well. So by running Intoxicating Shot, I'm increasing the value of my traps and the consistency of them, and I'm also increasing the risk that my opponent would take by accepting the on-hit. To sum up, I would say that in 95% of cases, it is a good card. You just have to be really careful with it. Remorseless is the last arrow in the list. It's universally run in almost all Ranger decks. You often get the tell that your opponent is holding a D-React in hand, like if they example block 6 on a 7 attack with 1 card left in hand, which they then arsenal on their turn. That just kind of tells you that's almost certainly a D-React. So when I see that happening, I'll try and prioritize my Remorseless because then they can't use any D-Reacts at all and it gives them even less resources to try and block out my attacks. For the non-arrow attacks, I was just playing 2. Command & Conquer is a staple in a lot of decks, and as I mentioned earlier, it complements Dreadbore nicely because we're basically incentivizing our opponents to put their D-Reacts in Arsenal, and Command & Conquer is the punish for that. We're also playing Ravenous Rabble. It's basically a more flexible and consistent buff in terms of if you see Rabble but no arrow, that's fine, you just attack with the Rabble. It doesn't always come in for 4, but most of the time it does. Moving on to the buffs, I opted to play just 6 in total, as I want to limit the number of dead hands that I draw and the number of 2 blocks that I have. All of them pair well with 0 cost arrows in 2 card hands to give you an above rate turn. Lace with Blood Rot is in here because it threatens 5 damage on its own. Seek and Destroy can help keep your opponent off of big turns and drain them of resources, and Premeditate buffing any attack means that it is super versatile and it offers great value. I'd often come in with a CNC for 9 after like a Codex, for example. Basically, I selected the 3 buffs that I thought would be relevant and powerful into every matchup and that would force my opponent to respect them. For everything else in the deck, we've got Codex of Frailty. You have to run this. It's just an absolutely busted card, especially with the Trench. You can do some really nice plays to kind of get around the discard effect. We're also playing 2 Sigil of Solace. This is maybe one of the best generic cards in Blitz, especially in Riptide when going second so that you can trigger his reload effect. Sigil saved me multiple times on the day from things like Reckless Swing and Arcane damage. You're never sad to see it, basically. We did play one defense reaction that wasn't a trap, and that was Sink Below. This is in here to try and short the matchups where we're facing really big attacks, and it's also nice for a bit of hand fixing too. Lastly, we do have 1 copy of Remembrance. Because Quiver is basically our second copy, we don't need to run 2, and I feel like running 2 in the main deck is a bit of a liability because it doesn't block. That being said, it is a yellow, so it fits nicely into your 2-card hand, so it's not always bad to see, especially if you're only planning on blocking with 2 cards. And that is the deck in its entirety. As I said, link is below so you can get a full look at it. I'll quickly go through what my matchups were. So it was 6 rounds of Swiss. I went 5-1 in those rounds of Swiss. So round 1 was against my friend on Fatigue, Arakni. We play a lot of games together and he always cries about Dreadbore, and I basically fatigued him in this game. He scooped with 1 card left in his hand to try and say that I didn't fatigue him, but I fatigued the fatiguer, like it or not. Round 2, I played against Dash, Pistol Dash. This was the matchup where I hit with a Collapsing Trap for 5. So what happened was, on their turn, they loaded Pistol, loaded up the Induction Chamber, passed back to me, I send in an attack, and they just block with a Crown of Providence, recycling that card from Arsenal and drawing a card. And then the first thing they do on their turn is Pistol, and as soon as they activate the Induction Chamber, I drop the Collapsing Trap on top of them after the Induction Chamber Go Again has resolved, and they discard a hand of 5 cards, and that hand was, it was really nice, really nice. I mean, to be fair, they did still come back with a 4-card hand, but it did mess up the turn. Towards the end of the game, I did take a bit more damage than I probably should have, just to try and see it out, and luckily it did pay off. Round 3 was against my friend on Ira. We did a few practice games, and this is the game I lost. I made a horrific misplay. So we're both down to very few cards left in deck. He's got 1 Warmongers that he's pitching for his 2 Kodachis every turn, and I've got 3 cards, one of which is an Endless Arrow. So I fire the Endless Arrow at him, he goes down to 1, and I'm also at 1. So at the end of my turn, I've got an Intoxicating Shot, a Searing Shot, and an Endless Arrow. The Intoxicating Shot's in my pitch zone. So I'm basically going to be having 3 cards to play with, and all I have to do is arsenal that Endless Arrow and shoot it at him next turn to win the game. But for some reason, I just keep it in hand and keep a hand of 3 cards. And then he comes at me twice again with 2 Kodachis, and I have to give him 2 cards, which means I cannot load my arrow in, and I lose the game, which was really frustrating. Yeah, absolutely horrible misplay. But after that, I was determined to not allow anything like that to happen for the rest of the day. Round 4 was against a Rhinar. This game was fairly close, but I think his first Blood Rush turn, I was able to hit him with a double Frailty, because I'd Codex the turn before and then had a Frailty trap, and that really limited the damage he could do. And it meant that I could come back at him after that Blood Rush turn and just kind of see the game out. Again, the Dreadbore really helped because he couldn't use his Reckless Swings very easily. Round 5 is against Uzuri. This was a very close game where we both kind of raced down and ended the game at very close life totals. I think I ended on 3. I got my opponent down to 1 health, and then I had the Spike Pit trap in hand, so it just meant that as soon as they tried to activate Uzuri, they were basically dead, and that is what happened. And then round 6, I was against a Vynnset. This was a really tough matchup. Runeblade is very, very difficult. I did end up winning this game through fatigue. I got my opponent down to 1 life again, and they had no attacks left in deck. They were playing the Flail of Agony, but they couldn't activate it because as soon as they activate it, they would die. Well, actually, no. To stop themselves from being fatigued, they commit Seppuku and activated the Flail of Agony. But yeah, Vynnset's quite a hard matchup. You just got to always pay for the rune chance with your blues instead of blocking with them, because it means you keep your cards in deck, and it means in the long game you are actually favoured. One thing I will note is I have had quite a bit of practice into Vynnset, and I know that you just have to be patient. In my experience, she can have these huge blowout turns where she comes at you with like 3 attacks, like a few buffs, lots of rune chance. You just you've got to give your hand there, prevent as much damage as possible, because you will get that window to hit back. And as soon as you do, and you do start applying that pressure, they can start to trip up, and that's how you win the game. So after that, it was top cut. In top 8, I faced against the Emperor. I've not really had much experience playing against the Emperor because I am mostly a classic constructed player. I just treated the matchup like I would treat it as though I was playing against an Icelander. So I just focused on keeping some cards in hand to pay for any arcane barrier that came my way, and I just kind of sent one big attack at them turn after turn after turn. This was a super close game, and I ended this game on 1 life. So what happened was, I can't remember the life totals exactly, but on his turn he hits me with the spell for 5, and I've got yellow bolt and shot, red bolt and shot, a buff, and a battering bolt. And what I do is I pitch the red battering bolt to pay for 1 AB to try and make my opponent think that I've only got an all red hand. So when the turn passes back to me, I play my buff, load in the bolt and shot, and I basically fire it. And in response, he breaks the Storm Striders. He plays a spell that takes me down to 2 life, and I don't pay for it. And with the last card in his hand, he then plays out the Waning Moon, because if I've got a red in hand, I just die. However, I've kept the yellow, and I survive at 1 and he dies. But yeah, really close game. I think it's a very tough matchup because I'm only presenting AB2, so you kind of have to race. Top 4 is against my friend on Ira that beat me in Swiss, and I just knew I had to win this, because if I lost this game, he would never let me hear the end of it, because he beat me twice at the ProQuest as well, and you just can't let that happen. This was also a close game, but I think I saw my traps at very good points. I always got value from them, because Ira basically triggers every single one of your traps, barring the Spike Pit trap. And I was just basically able to present more damage over the turns we played and kind of see that game out. And then in the final, I got paired against a Rhinar. This game was looking a little rough to begin with. I was kind of on the back foot, but I was still confident I could see it out, because you just kind of got to sit tight and wait for Rhinar's inconsistent turns. I got really fortunate with a Buzzsaw trap in Arsenal when he played Blood Rush. So what happened was, came at me with a claw, and I blocked with... So when he played the Blood Rush, I had 4 2-blocks in hand, which was really unfortunate. He intimidates one of them away. I give him 2 of my 2 blocks for the claw. He then plays a barraging beatdown to intimidate the last one, and he sends a claw in for 7, but I buzzsaw trap it from Arsenal, and then he comes at me with another attack. So I don't actually take that much damage on the Blood Rush turn. Later on in the game, he whiffs on a Wild Ride, but to be honest, I didn't want him to, because I had 2 of my Go Again traps ready for it. So it was sort of a blessing and a curse at the same time. And later on in the game, I force him to block with his other Blood Rush. So after that, I'm pretty happy that I can block out any threats that he has and kind of slowly grind out the win. So I did end up fatiguing him as well. But again, that's not the plan going into the game. It's just what happened during the game. But yeah, overall, was really happy with how the deck performed. It was just super consistent, always giving good numbers, always good value. The game I lost, if I hadn't misplayed, I'd have won. So in my head, I sort of went undefeated, even though I didn't really. But yeah, Riptide is a severely underrated hero. I think a lot of people don't have experience playing against him, which also definitely helped. Without the draw my matchup being so prevalent in Blitz, you can get away with playing him and kind of feel safe with it. I did a lot of testing with him before the event with my friend Gustavo, who also got top 4 with Riptide, even though we play very, very different lists. We basically kind of became more polarized as we practiced, because we started disagreeing more. But yeah, there's clearly a very strong hero to be had here. If you want to run this for your skirmish, I think it's a very solid choice, because not a lot of people will expect it. And if you put in the reps with it and you know exactly how to play it, then you can get some really powerful turns out and take a lot of people by surprise with them. Let me know if you have any questions about any of the choices or any of the exclusions from the deck. I'd like to quickly mention that I don't play any of the Crucible traps, and I don't play the Death Touches or anything that needs to be played from Arsenal, because these are really, really inflexible cards. They kind of force you down certain play lines. And one of the key things about this deck is its ability to be flexible. So I didn't want to be forced into having dead cards in my hand or having to block out with certain cards just so I could Arsenal a Death Touch or a trap. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. Have a good day, and I hope that if you're watching this and want to play Riptide, that you kill some people with him. Adios.